Howdy, Scribblers! I'm Katie, and welcome to another round of writing tips and tricks. Today, we're going to be looking at voice, one of the most elusive pieces of writing craft. It's really hard to pin down a standard definition for this element, and in writing, you have both your author voice and you have your character voice. The author voice is the you in the story. It's the idea that across all of your works, there's a thread binding them all together. Someone could pick up your work and, without having seen your name on the cover, read some and immediately think that it was yours. It's kind of the same ways like when you hear a song on the radio and you've never heard it before, and you're like, oh, wait, that really sounds like, and then you say the name of the band, and 99% of the time you're right because that band has a very specific sound and cadence, and you just kind of know what to expect from them. Character voice, on the other hand, is the word, the tones, the sentence structure, all of that. It's the diction of how that character speaks and thinks. And you want your character's voice to be so strong that if you pulled a random bit out, it would be instantly identifiable, whether there was dialogue tags or a name attached to it. This can become even more important when you have multi point of view books. Your reader needs to be able to know which point of view the chapter's in within a couple sentences to just immediately orient themselves and know what's going on. I have never not written a multi point of view manuscript. When I write a zero draft, all of my characters sound the same, and they don't even sound cool in their sameness. It's very cliched. It's a very basic type of writing because I'm still very much figuring my characters out. And by the end, there might be a few moments where their personalities have really shined through, bright and clear. But for the most part, it's really something that I tackle in revisions. So multiple sets of revisions. This is something that takes me three or four or even more times to really get right. And so it's not something that necessarily comes like immediately on the page. For some writers, it absolutely will. But for me, and I think for a lot of writers, when we first start out, that our characters are very, very flat. They're not round. They're not exciting. They're not layered. They're just very basic because we're still learning about them. So in my latest round of revisions, the ones I just finished, I worked really hard to make each of my point of view characters stand out. So I have three in the manuscript I'm working on. And I had several readers point out in past versions that there really wasn't enough difference between, especially two of my characters. They're best friends. So they share a lot of the same beliefs. And I really needed to dig into how those ideas and actions would manifest on the page because they have two very wildly different personalities, but I wasn't quite getting there. And this was actually really hard for me to accept at first that my readers thought that my characters sounded too similar. Um, and I found it actually really frustrating, mostly because I, as the creator of these characters, I was like, how are they similar? They're so different. But therein lies the rub, right? My readers don't have access to my brain. Thank goodness. And so while my characters are clearly delineated in my mind and I can see exactly how they're different and exactly how they're, you know, just so unique, it wasn't coming through strong enough on the page. So I really needed to, like I said, just dig deeper and make each one stand out. So it was really, really good feedback, even though wasn't what I was hoping for when I got that feedback. Um, but that, my dear scribblers, is why good betas and CPs are worth their weight in gold. They're going to tell you sometimes the things that you don't want to hear, and it's really strong, good advice. So I have three tips for making your voice stand out. And these are kind of the ways that I really use to figure out how to manifest my main characters and to make them be like the star of the show in their own little world, right? So, tip number one is to know their background. So, knowing their background, you might not include a lick of backstory in your actual manuscript, but that character had to come from somewhere. You created it. So, you need to know where that character came from and what happened in their past. You can get as detailed as you like, but you definitely need to understand some basics. For example, like what was their family like? Did they have siblings? Were they the only child? Were they was extended family involved in raising them? What was all those relationships like? Because there's definitely different things, that older children the oldest child in a family tends to do and take on as personality traits, as opposed to the youngest in the family, as opposed to the middle child. So you can kind of like start looking at all of these different relationships and all these different details, and really help that to get into the inner workings of your character. Another thing you might want to look at is, for example, their socioeconomic status, right? Different income groups communicate differently at the family level, both in how they communicate and in what they communicate or what they talk about. And this is something that as a teacher, like we kind of discuss at different points, because our students are getting different communications at home, right? So your billionaire families, right? Those families that have multiple homes and resorts places and all these things and just flying around the country. So a billionaire family might talk about the ski trip that they're taking to Switzerland, and like, oh, I have to remember to change my investments, or we did this, or hiring a new tennis coach. So those are going to be very like future type plans. They're not worried about like the here and now so much. They're worried about like, oh, like what's happening in a month? Like, where are we going to be going? Like, shall we go to Switzerland, or maybe we should go to Greenland? I don't know. Wherever it is they're going to go. So that's very different from like a middle income family might be more likely to talk about grocery shopping. Did you go get groceries this week? Oh, I didn't have time today, but I'm going to go tomorrow. Make sure we have the list on the thing. Hey, Joey, did you want something special? Um, what kind of cereal was it that you really liked? So very, very different conversations with the middle income families. They might also talk about things like vacations, but they're going to be much smaller. They're going to be like, hey, like, do you think we're going to go to the beach this year? Maybe we'll meet up with our family there. Or, grandma said we could go to her house for the summer, things like that. So it's a very different dynamic within the family and within that communications. That billionaire family probably never really talks about creating a grocery list or things like that, because they're going to have a cook doing those for them. Lower income families tend to communicate a lot about like immediate needs. So, did you do your homework? Why aren't you watching your brother? Did you clean your room? So, each of those things, it's very much rooted in the now, because that's where their focus is. Okay, what do I need to get through this exact moment? Um, so each of these, like kind of my little scenarios here, is very much so predicated on the intricacies and nuances of their daily lives. And please also remember, these are very basic caricatures that I'm talking about right here, and there is no one identifying element that makes someone a monolith, in any type of situation ever. There's always outliers, there's always differences, and so don't ever be like, oh well, this is the only way that this person could ever be, because that's not true. These, like I said, basic caricatures. But the point is that you're going to need to know the words, the phrases, and the sentence structures that your characters grew up with, and make that consistent. Okay. To go back to that billionaire and that middle income family, they might have parents who have time to read to them. Or if the billionaire family does not read to them, they might have like a nanny or a caretaker that reads with them or reads to them. That lower income family might not have somebody who reads to them. So therefore, they don't get as much reading. They're not going to have the same levels of vocabularies and thing like that. So really, again, it's doing all of these different elements will help you to understand why your character acts the way that they do. Um, One example that I think is just a really great example that's like pretty universally known is the nurse from Romeo and Juliet, right? So she's very much like a low class servant. Like they make this very evident throughout the play. Um, but she's lived with the Montague, no, sorry, the Capulet family. Like, wow, I got that wrong. She's lived with the Capulet family for so long, and she's raised Juliet up. So she's heard a lot of words, right? She's heard a lot of things. She overhears conversations all the time, and she also often tries to sound really smart, but every time she does, she misuses words. She has those malapropisms, right? Um, and so here she is, she's trying to take on that language and that wording of an economic class that she does not belong to. So it's really, I think, interesting that she does this, and she just is consistently using the wrong words, right? Um, So how did this play out in my manuscript was that I have my two main characters, they grew up as orphans. So I really worked to make that evident in how they process and prioritize the world. Okay. So they're both cautious about forming relationships with others. They only count on and trust each other because every other person in their life has always like failed them or disappeared or not followed through. Um, so they don't trust anybody except for each other. Okay. And they look at the world and they just see, wow, these are all people who have what they need or take what they want. um and so when they want something, they just take it, kind of regardless of whether it's the morally right thing to do, because they're like, nobody else is going to get this for me, and so if I don't do this, if I don't take this, um it's not going to happen for me. So they're very kind of like in the moment. They don't have a lot of plans made out as far as like, oh, this is what I think my future is going to be, or this is what we're going to do in 10 years. So you're like, we always talk about 5 and 10 year goals as humans. They have none. Their goals are much more like, okay, what's happening today and what are we going to do? So knowing that about them, I just really tried to pull that out more, and really think about how that would make them act in different situations. So just like us, our characters are creatures of habit. So my characters are creatures of habit. They've always done that. So even as they start to change their situation and I start to make life is a little bit better for them, it's a little bit more stable, they're still going to go back and make those poor choices, right? If a chance arises for them to steal the wallet, even though right now they're kind of like economically stable, they're going to do it. And those behaviors and beliefs are really embedded in their brain. So it's why we love, I think, stories about characters who are, retired from their life of crime, or from being an assassin, or all those different things, because as soon as the need arises, they fall right back into their old habits. An example of this I really love, and I think he's a favorite, is Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender. He's a fierce warrior and he's a firebender, but he has completely walked away from his past and he's really trying to make amends, right? But those skills continue to show up as he guides Zuko towards the right side of history. So he never really gets away from those things that and those ideas that were embedded in him, and those practices and those skills and that way of talking and the way of thinking. Even though he has managed to change the direction of it, you still see it showing up throughout his choices and his life. All right. So that is tip number one. And that is just really know your character. Take a look at your manuscript, um, and your character. So what's their story? Why do they act, talk, and think the way that they do? Knowing their backstory will help you to better understand how they operate. All right. We'll see you next time with tip number 2. So happy writing, Scribblers.